It's all right. Don't be afraid. You're safe here with me.
Would you believe that a mother who had a miscarriage would secretly raise a non-human creature? In 1989, deep in the misty Ozark Mountains of Arkansas, during a night of violent storms and howling wind, Iris Coleman heard the faintest cry coming from the old horse barn. What she found would change her life forever. A trembling baby Bigfoot, its eyes wide with fear and innocence, its small hands reaching out like a child's. But instead of running or calling for help, something awakened in Iris. The ache of motherhood, the kind that never leaves. She named the creature Rowan and chose to love him in secret. Milk bottles, warm blankets, bedtime whispers. And in return, Rowan began to mimic chickens, call out soft "ma" sounds, and lean into her arms. But love, real love, means letting go. And when Rowan began calling to the forest each night, Iris knew his real mother was searching. What happened next, under the light of a full moon, will move even the most skeptical heart. And it didn't end there. Because after that night, something magical began to protect their farm. Wolves disappeared, crops revived, broken fences mended themselves. This story remained a family secret until a hidden journal revealed it to the world. And now, my dear viewer, where are you watching from tonight? What's your name? Because stories like this, ones that touch the heart and remind us of the wild, gentle things in this world, deserve to be shared. Let's build a community of believers, of storytellers, of those who still hope. If this tale stirred something in you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes in wonder. From my heart to yours, thank you for being here. The wind had teeth that afternoon. It chewed through the brittle corn stalks, gnawed at the edge of the porch, and whistled down the rusted wind chimes like a voice warning from a distance. The Coleman farm had seen quieter seasons, golden hours where everything stood still and kind. But this wasn't one of them. The clouds were already folding into each other, thickening, turning from pewter to black. The storm wasn't just rolling in. It was hunting something. Iris stood at the window, her fingers resting lightly on the glass, eyes half closed, half watching. Her other hand clutched a pale blue box with a satin ribbon faded nearly white with time. It used to sit beneath the bed, then moved to the back of the closet, then returned to her hands today. She didn't know why. Only that she couldn't stop herself. The ribbon gave way with a soft sigh. Inside lay a pair of hand-knit socks, impossibly small, a baby bottle still wrapped in plastic, a green onesie with tiny horses embroidered across the chest. Folded beneath them, wrapped in soft linen, was a card that read, "For when he comes home." She had written it herself, a lifetime ago. The wind howled louder now, thudding against the walls of the farmhouse. Ray's truck wasn't back yet, probably stuck in town, trying to charm more time out of people who'd stopped believing his promises. Iris didn't blame them. Debt had a smell to it, like mildew in the seams of wood, like a storm about to break. She had stopped asking questions, stopped hoping for miracles, stopped everything, really, except existing. A creak outside made her turn. The barn door had slammed open again, its latch never quite holding right. She moved to the porch, pulling her shawl tighter. The field stretched before her like a sea of old bones, corn half-harvested, browned by sun and neglect. The horses were restless tonight. She could hear them snorting, hooves shuffling. Not just the wind. They knew. As she stepped off the porch, she paused. A flicker of something, movement, at the far end of the field, on the ridge that looked toward the Ozarks. There, just for a breath. A figure, tall, still, too big to be a man. No hat, No rifle, just standing, watching the house. Lightning cracked. For a split second, the figure lit up against the sky, like something pulled from myth or memory, and vanished before the thunder could catch it. Her heart stumbled. Not fear. Not yet. Just a pulling sensation, like a wire gently tightening behind her ribs. She turned and headed toward the barn. Inside, the air was thick with sweat and dust. The horses were agitated, eyes wide, nostrils flaring as if something ancient had crawled into their lungs. She murmured to them, placed her palm on the flank of the black mare, soothed her the way she'd once soothed a crying baby in a hospital room that never heard laughter again. Something had spooked them. She could feel it in her spine. She checked the stalls, her boots thudding against the planks. The far corner had hay scattered oddly, the bales pulled back as if something had ducked behind them. Iris squinted. Just shadows, just stormlight. She moved outside again, lantern in hand, eyes scanning the earth. The first drops of rain landed like warnings, fat and cold. She took another step and stopped, there beneath the overhang, in the patch of dirt that hadn't yet been soaked through. Tracks. Deer, yes, hooves, common. But pressed beside them, too close, overlapping even, were other prints. 5 toes, broad heel, longer than her boot, deep, too deep for a man. She knelt, heart quiet now, focused. The wind blew harder, trying to wipe away what she'd found. She reached out, touched the edge of the print. It was real. Damp earth pressed by something heavy. Then the rain washed over it like a curtain falling. Back inside, the radio buzzed to life. Ray always left it on low. Some local AM channel that never quite died. And out by the ridgelines, the old man on the radio drawled. They say there's a creature. Hairy as sin, quiet as prayer. I seen it once. Ozarks ain't just hills and hollers, y'all. They got memory. Click. The static silenced. Ray had come in without a word and turned it off. His eyes met Iris's for a moment. Tired eyes, the kind that had buried hope years ago and didn't want it dug up again. You checked the fence? He asked. Later, she said. He looked like he wanted to press more, but didn't. Just nodded, grabbed a beer, and sank into the chair by the window like a man watching the world collapse $1 at a time. Iris went back outside. The rain was falling steadier now, wind tossing her dress against her legs. The barn creaked, moaned, as if something inside it breathed. Then, a sound, faint, carried from somewhere beyond the first line of trees. It didn't belong to wind or wolf. It was long, low, stretched out like a name said too slow. Not an animal, not quite human. It had intention. Her lantern flickered. The sound came again, from deep in the woods, and it was calling. She froze. It was a voice, but not one that language had shaped. The rain fell harder. Thunder rolled overhead. She backed toward the porch, half tripping, soaked through. She didn't sleep that night. The storm settled in like a monster lying across the hills, groaning and snarling in its dreams. The windows rattled. The walls hissed with wind. Ray snored through it all, too tired or too empty to care. Iris lay awake, hands on her stomach as if remembering what it once held. Near dawn, the storm began to loosen. The hard wind softened. The lightning wandered away. But something in her bones twisted tighter. Then came the sound again, not from the forest this time. From the barn, a whimper, high-pitched, weak, like a baby crying through a throat not meant to cry. Iris sat up, breath caught. For a moment she didn't move, just listened. Thunder had faded. All she heard was that sound, again, again. Soft, fragile, scared. She stood, heart thudding, grabbed the lantern, didn't wake Ray. Out the back door. Her boots squelched into the soaked grass. The air smelled of ozone and wet hay. Every part of her body told her to turn back. Every part of her soul told her to go on. The barn door creaked open. She raised the lantern. Inside, the horses shifted uneasily, but didn't panic this time. They knew, maybe. Or accepted. The sound led her to the far stall. The old one. Hadn't been used since... well, since then. The crying paused, then came again, softer. Iris stepped forward. Her lantern wobbled. She leaned over the gate and saw it. Tucked behind the hay, shivering beneath a torn blanket, something had dragged there. Was a small figure. Its fur was soaked, clumped, matted with mud. Arms curled around itself, feet too large for the body. One of them scraped raw. Its breath came in hiccups. Its eyes were wide, black as coal, wet with fear. But what struck her first wasn't the size, or the fur, or even the smell of forest and rain clinging to its skin. It was the sound it made when it saw her. It didn't scream, didn't growl. It cooed, like a toddler trying to remember how to speak. She didn't move, just stared. The creature's small hand, shockingly human in shape with fur ending at the wrist, reached out toward her lantern. Then it whispered brokenly, "See." Her chest caved. She knelt, barely breathing. Placed the lantern down. Lightning flashed again, but softer now, filtered through clouds that had nearly cried themselves out. And in that light, Iris reached out. The creature trembled. She didn't touch it, not yet, but she whispered back, "Easy." Its eyes flicked to her necklace, a single silver chain, holding a small charm shaped like a leaf. It reached for it, fingers delicate. She let it. The tiny hand curled around the charm, held it as if it knew what it meant, knew her grief, knew her. Iris sat in the hay, rain dripping from the rafters, watching a miracle tremble. She said nothing else, not even when it leaned into her side, exhausted, breath soft against her ribs. And when it finally slept, curled tight like a child hiding from thunder, she reached down and gently swept aside the damp fur at its temple. She kissed it there, not as a scientist, not as a woman who should have screamed, but as a mother. And the words when they came weren't dramatic, weren't anything she planned. They were simply true. "If you're a lost child," she said, "then tonight I'll be your home." The wind outside paused, as if listening, and somewhere far in the woods, a shape stirred. A presence rose like fog from the roots, but it didn't come forward yet. Not tonight. Tonight was for shelter, and silence, and the strange, aching sound of love being remembered. The lantern shook in her hand, its glass fogged by her breath and the storm's chill. Iris pushed the barn door open with her shoulder, the wind dragging at her coat like a child not ready to let go. The horses didn't spook this time. They shifted, yes, but they knew her. It was the sound that didn't belong. The soft, uneven cry that came again, tugging at her like a thread through her rib cage. A whimper, small and sharp, not quite human, but not wild either. Something caught between both. She stepped forward, each board beneath her boots groaning as if unsure they should hold this moment. The hay smelled sweet and wet, thick with the scent of animal sweat and old straw. Rain pattered against the tin roof, slow now, like fingers drumming with hesitation. Her lantern cast wide yellow light, curling into the corners and trembling against the beams. The crying stopped. Iris stood still, chest rising and falling like the wind through the corn outside. She waited, let her own heartbeat settle. Tried not to think of the box upstairs, still open on the bed, its contents breathing memory into the dark. She moved past the stalls, pausing by the last one, the old one, the one that hadn't held anything since. No, don't name it. Naming it only made it bleed again. She raised the lantern and saw it. Not clearly at first, just a huddled lump tucked into the back corner behind the hay. At first glance, it might have been a pile of feed sacks or a curled raccoon, until it shivered, until a small arm reached to pull straw tighter like a child hiding from thunder. She crouched slowly, her knees creaking, the lantern's glow dipping low enough to catch detail. Fur, yes, but not the mangled fur of a wounded coyote or wild dog. This was brushed, soaked, curling where it dried. A soft, deep brown like wet leaves in autumn. A foot slid into view, oversized, twisted slightly inward, calloused. 5 toes. And then a hand. God, that hand. It was small. Small enough to be mistaken for a child's in the half-light. But the fingers were longer, knuckled strangely. Fur stopped at the wrist. The palm was dry, cracked, clutching a scrap of old tarp like it was all that kept it breathing. The creature stirred again, eyes opened. They were enormous. Black, not just dark in color, but deep. Like if she looked too long, she might fall into them and forget her name. They blinked slowly, heavy with fear or fever or both. The creature tried to sit up, failed, tried again. It didn't growl, didn't run. It only whimpered again, barely louder than the wind sneaking through the slats. Then, without warning, it coughed. A wet sound, ragged, painful. She moved closer, not even thinking anymore. Just instinct, the kind buried under loss, waiting for a moment like this to wake. "It's all right," she whispered. The creature's head turned toward her voice. Its lip, soft, oddly human, trembled. Then it did something she hadn't expected. It mimicked the sound she'd made. Not well, not perfectly, but close. Right. Iris froze. Something in her spine lit up. Not from fear, from the overwhelming, impossible intimacy of it. The creature tried to speak again. See. Her mouth fell open. The word had weight, not just sound. It knew what it was trying to say. It had heard someone say that before, maybe more than once, maybe enough times for it to learn when it meant safety. She dropped to her knees in the straw and set the lantern gently between them. Her fingers trembled as she reached forward. Not to touch, just to let it see she wasn't hiding anything. The creature flinched. Then, after a moment, it reached toward her. The hand that touched hers was cool, calloused, and shaking. She looked down and saw the blood, not fresh, dried into the fur along one thigh. A drag mark, as if it had crawled here from somewhere else. She followed it with her eyes and noticed, beneath the straw in the corner, faint grooves in the dirt where it had pulled itself across the floor. No predator had carried it. It had fled something. The creature's breathing quickened. She pulled her coat off in one fluid motion, draped it around its shoulders. It shuddered at the warmth, eyes closing for a second. It leaned into the coat the way a sick child would lean into a mother's arms. Something made her glance toward the stall door. There, high on the wooden beam, was a handprint, far too large to be this creature's, nearly double the size of her own. The wood beneath it had bowed slightly, pressed hard recently, not stained, wet from the rain. Something bigger had come here first, and left it behind. The creature reached for the necklace at her chest, small silver leaf, the one Ray had given her when she found out she was pregnant, the one she never took off, even when there was no child to give it to. The creature's fingers closed around the charm, held it, stared at it with that wide, quiet focus only very young beings possessed. Then it looked back at her, not pleading, not begging, just knowing. Iris swallowed hard. She rose slowly, pulled hay into the corner to form a softer bed, fetched an old blanket from the feed room, and came back to find it asleep, curled in her coat, thumb brushing the leaf charm as it dreamed. She stood there a long time watching. It didn't snore. It made soft sounds, like whispers in sleep. At one point it mimicked the soft nicker of a horse, as though trying to blend in. She couldn't make sense of it. Didn't need to. It was cold, hurt, alone. That was enough. She left the stall quietly, pulling the door shut behind her, not bolting it. Back in the house, Ray stirred but didn't wake. She crept past him, up the stairs, changed out of her soaked clothes. She didn't sleep. At dawn, the rain had stopped. The farm was wrapped in gray fog. Light filtered in like a secret. Iris made oatmeal and poured a little into a tin bowl, then added chopped apples, remembering the way the creature had reached for the silver leaf. Curious. Drawn to detail. Back at the barn, The stall was quiet. She opened the door slowly. The creature was awake, sitting up now, eyes dull but alert. When she stepped in, it flinched, then froze. She crouched again, setting the bowl down, then stepped back. It sniffed the air, paused. Then, awkwardly, legs too long for its body, arms too strong for its frame, it shuffled forward, sat cross-legged, dipped its fingers into the bowl. It ate slowly, cautiously, but it ate. Halfway through, it stopped and looked at her again. She smiled just once. "Do you have a name?" she asked softly. It didn't answer, but it tilted its head. She tried again. "Can I call you something?" The wind moved through the cracks again, curling around them like an old tune. Her eyes drifted to the window. Beyond the fence line, a single tree stood crooked against the hill. A Rowan tree. Unusual in this part of Missouri. She whispered, "Rowan." The creature didn't react. Then, almost imperceptibly, it blinked, as if testing the sound of it inside its own head. Iris sat down in the straw, resting her back against the post. Rowan finished the food. Then, as if it had always known how, crawled into her side and leaned gently against her ribs. Later that morning, as she cleaned the feeding troughs, Iris heard a soft sound from behind and turned to see Rowan mimicking the chickens. Not cruelly, just curious. He copied their sounds. Then the goats. Then even the creaking barn door. When she laughed, just a breath of laughter, startled and unsure, he looked up and did it again, more precise. He was learning. He was trying. That afternoon, Ray came into the barn for a wrench. Iris nearly panicked, blocking the stall door with her body, pretending to be cleaning. Rowan stayed quiet. Ray didn't notice, didn't want to notice. She watched his boots crunch straw, watched his back as he disappeared around the corner. Her heart didn't settle for a full hour. That night, before the moon rose, she found a strange bundle on the fence post outside the barn. Twisted grass, woven into a circle. Inside, a smaller ring. Delicate, intentional. It hadn't been there before. A message, maybe. A sign. Rowan slept soundly now, curled beneath a clean blanket. His thumb brushed the necklace in his sleep again, and Iris sat by the stall gate, hands folded, head leaned against the wood, whispering to herself something she hadn't dared say in years. A prayer, maybe. A promise. She didn't wake Ray. Didn't explain the new food disappearing. Didn't mention the prince. Some things weren't meant to be shared. Not yet. Maybe not ever. In the silence, Rowan stirred and whispered something, half breath, half dream. "Ma!" She froze. The sound didn't ask, didn't beg. It remembered, and she answered it, without words. Just stayed beside him, breathing in rhythm, like a lullaby no one had written down. And if, that night, the forest beyond the fields seemed to breathe a little closer, lean a little nearer, she didn't turn away. Not anymore. Morning light slipped in slow, like it was unsure whether it belonged here. The barn felt warmer than the air outside, not just from the bodies of horses breathing into the hay, but from something quieter, deeper, a presence soft as wool and just as easy to tangle with. Iris had barely slept. She'd kept waking to listen for the shift of tiny limbs under blankets, the catch of breath that didn't sound like her own. Each time she opened her eyes, she expected it to be a dream breaking apart in daylight. But he was still there. Rowan. The name had come to her like a memory she hadn't lived. She wasn't sure if she'd named him or if the world had, but it fit. He was like that tree on the hill. Unexpected, stubborn, bending in the wind, but refusing to fall. She watched him now through a crack in the stall, his arms stretched across the hay, legs twitching in sleep. He'd pulled the blanket tight under his chin, and one massive foot had slipped out the side, bare toes flexing slightly as if still running in dreams. She stepped in quietly, holding a bowl of warm mashed potatoes and butter, leftover from last night's dinner. He'd liked the apples. Maybe this would soothe his belly again. As she bent to set the bowl near him, his eyes opened. They didn't startle like most children's would. No gasp, no jerk backward. Just slow, curious blinking, like the day didn't scare him, only surprised him. She crouched. "Good morning," she whispered, brushing a loose strand of her own hair behind her ear. He blinked once. Then, as if following a cue, he did the same gesture, his oversized fingers dragging a bit of straw from his brow. His gaze dropped to the bowl, then to her, then back to the bowl. "Eat," she said softly, tapping her chest. "Iris, me." He stared, not blankly, intently. The kind of stare that tried to peel meaning off sound. He lifted one hand and touched his own chest, tentative, then pointed at the window. Not randomly. He was asking something. Maybe where was the forest? She didn't answer. She didn't know how to yet. She only nudged the bowl forward. "Eat," Rowan sniffed once, then reached. His fingers scooped awkwardly, more fist than utensil. But the moment the butter hit his tongue, his eyes lit. He looked at her again, almost like delight. She exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. He ate slowly, like he was trying to make it last. At one point he paused to mimic the sound of a rooster crowing from outside, then a short bray of the donkey in the pen beside them. Each sound came out oddly shaped, but clearly intentional. Iris smiled. "You've got a good ear." He tilted his head. Then he did it. He pulled the blanket down and stood, a little unsteady, legs long and knobby at the knees, shoulders hunched slightly, as if he hadn't grown into them yet. His body was leaner than she'd expected, not underfed, but wiry, like a deer learning to balance. Then he shuffled past her, dragging something behind him in both arms. At first, she didn't recognize it. Then her chest tightened. It was the green onesie, the one with the little horses, from the box upstairs. He must have found it under the bench in the stall, where she'd placed it 2 nights ago, tucked into a canvas bag she hadn't touched in years. He sat cross-legged in the hay, examining the fabric. Then he did something that made her throat close. He held the onesie to his chest, rocked slightly, then made a sound, soft, rhythmic, not crying, mimicking a baby's whimper. The memory of a cry. Her knees gave. She sat hard in the straw, hand covering her mouth. Rowan looked up, as if unsure what emotion he'd triggered. Iris reached toward him, hesitated, then gently placed a hand on his shoulder. He didn't flinch. She didn't speak, didn't trust her voice. They sat that way until the barn door creaked open and she heard boots. Ray. Her breath caught. She stood in one fluid motion and stepped into the center aisle. "Need something?" she asked, too quickly, too bright. Ray squinted at her. "Wrench," he muttered, brushing rain off his coat. "The red one." She blocked the stall door with her body. "I'll get it." He watched her a second too long, but didn't argue. She fetched the wrench, her palms sweating. Ray took it, nodded, and left. She waited until his footsteps faded completely. Rowan hadn't moved, but he was watching her. She smiled, shaky. "You're good at being quiet." He blinked slowly, then crawled forward and nudged the onesie toward her. She held it carefully, smoothed the creases. His eyes rested on her necklace again. The silver leaf. He reached for it, touched it, then placed his palm flat against her chest. The gesture held. She pressed her own hand over his. Neither of them spoke. Later that afternoon, while the sky softened and crows circled above the cornfield, Iris stepped outside to check the fence line. The wind had dropped, but the air still carried something. Not a storm, a watchfulness. Near the south post, hanging from the top rail, was something new. A circle of woven grass, bent delicately into a loop. Not carelessly made, intentionally placed. Inside the loop, woven smaller, a pattern that mimicked the shape of her necklace charm. She touched it with 2 fingers. Not fear, recognition. Someone had seen, and wanted her to know they'd seen. She left a slice of apple on the post beside it. When she came back inside, Alma was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping tea like she hadn't appeared unannounced. like she hadn't driven 20 minutes just to be sure her bones weren't lying. "I felt it," Alma said without looking up. "The woods are breathing different this week." Iris poured coffee, sat, said nothing. Alma didn't press. She never did. But her eyes softened. "You know, there was a time people used to believe the forest gave gifts. Not always the ones we wanted. Sometimes the ones we needed." Iris swallowed. "And sometimes it takes things back." That night, as the farm darkened into a hush, Rowan sat near the lantern, legs crossed, fiddling with a coil of twine she'd given him. His hands were clumsy but patient. She sat beside him, picking at a torn seam in her jeans. Rowan suddenly looked up and said, clearly, "Ma!" She froze. He didn't say it again, didn't seem to know what it meant. Or maybe he did. She reached for him, brushed the fur back from his brow. His eyes fluttered closed. She whispered, "I'm not her." He leaned into her side anyway. That night he slept curled into her chest like a question she couldn't answer. And just before dawn, when the stars were barely visible and the wind shifted direction like a dog changing its mind, Iris stepped outside to take in the air. The tree line across the field was still. But there, near the fence again, another bundle. Woven tighter this time, laced with red clover. The message wasn't louder. It was clearer. "We see you. We know. And maybe we're grateful." She picked it up carefully, held it to her heart. Back inside, Rowan stirred in sleep, mumbling sounds she couldn't quite name. But one word floated up clearly, like a name or a promise. Rowan. She knelt beside him and smoothed the blanket up over his shoulder. If she was afraid of the mother coming back, she didn't say it. If she was terrified that one day she'd have to give him up, she kept it buried deep. Tonight he was still here, and that was enough. For now. The days were beginning to stretch long and golden, but Rowan didn't chase light the way he used to. Not with the same wide-eyed wonder. Not with the same bounce in his legs. Something had shifted. Iris saw it in the way he paused at the barn door each morning, eyes tracking the tree line instead of the sky. In the way he barely touched his food now, chewing slow, distracted, listening for something she couldn't hear. And at night, God, especially at night, he didn't curl into her the way he had before. He lay facing the wall, shoulders hunched, ears tilted toward the dark outside like radar pulling its silence. She didn't ask. She just watched and waited. By the third night, the stillness in him had grown heavier than his body. He didn't mimic the rooster anymore, didn't tap rhythms on the barn beams. He sat with his legs pulled up, arms wrapped tight around his knees, staring out past the horses, past the wooden slats, into something she couldn't see. Then it came, a sound, long and low, lifted out of the trees like it had been hiding there all day. It wasn't a howl, not a wolf or coyote. It moved like a ribbon, slow, mournful, aching. It wasn't angry, but it carried weight, purpose. It stretched across the fields and through the barn wall and right into Rowan's chest. He flinched just once, and then stilled completely. Iris was kneeling nearby, folding blankets for the cot she'd built him from old feed crates and quilts. Her hands paused. Rowan rose slowly, walked to the stall door, stared out. He didn't cry. He just looked. She knew. Her throat closed. He turned back, eyes glossy in the lantern light. Said nothing. Neither did she. That same night, after she'd finally settled him with warm milk and a tangle of whispered stories, she slipped out of the barn and into the night air. The farm was breathing. The grass moved like a sleeping animal, the cornfields whispering secrets between stalks. She crossed the yard slowly, her boots quiet in the dew, and entered the house through the back kitchen door. Ray was sitting at the table, shirt off, neck damp with sweat, elbow resting on the edge of the radio like he'd been thinking hard about something but couldn't bring himself to say it out loud. He glanced up. "Something's wrong, ain't it?" She nodded. He didn't ask what. She poured coffee, sat across from him. Ray tapped his thumbnail against the side of his beer bottle. "Storm's past. Feels like something else is coming." She looked at him for a long moment, then said softly, "He heard something." He didn't ask who he was anymore. That line had been crossed days ago. "From the woods?" She nodded. Ray rubbed his chin, stared at the window. "You think it's her?" Iris didn't answer right away. But in her silence, something solid pressed between them. A mother doesn't call unless she's near. The next morning, Rowan barely touched his food again. He sat near the open stall door, staring at the fields. His hands rested in his lap, still. Too still for a child. He didn't respond to the goat's calls, didn't echo the rooster's war cry. Just watched the edge of the world, where trees bled into mist, and mist waited like it knew something they didn't. That evening, Ray almost saw him. Iris had taken Rowan into the backyard for some fresh air, keeping close to the fence line. The boy seemed calmer outside, not happier. Never quite happy now, but quiet, at peace. He tilted his head like he could hear something deep underground. Then he placed one hand to the soil. That's when the back door creaked open and Ray stepped out. Iris whipped around. Rowan ducked instantly behind her legs, heart thudding so loud she could feel it in her knees. Ray squinted. "You out here talking to yourself again?" She laughed once. "You're the one talking to fences and beer bottles." He chuckled, rubbed the back of his neck, and went back inside. She turned to Rowan, whispered, "We have to be more careful." He didn't speak, but he understood. 2 nights later, the forest called again. This time the sound came closer, closer than it had any right to. Rowan stood up before the note had finished echoing. He stepped toward the open door, paused, looked back. His eyes were glassy, scared, not of the call, but of what it might mean. Iris rose from her seat, reached for his hand. He let her take it. They stepped outside together. The moon was barely above the trees, a sliver of silver behind a curtain of cloud. The wind had died, but something was still moving. She felt it in the air, like a ripple through water. They walked slowly through the backyard, toward the edge of the cornfield, and then they saw her. Not fully at first, just a shape, a tall figure, half shadowed by the curve of the trees. She didn't move like a beast. She didn't lurch or crouch or snarl. She stood tall, still, proud, her body wide with muscle, covered in thick matted fur the color of old oak bark. One arm dangled slightly lower than the other. Her right shoulder carried a deep scar, pale and twisted. Rowan made a sound, soft, small. It caught in his throat. The figure didn't rush forward, didn't scream. She stepped out slowly, into the open. Let the moon catch the edge of her face. Eyes, amber, sad, knowing. She dropped to one knee, held out her arms. Rowan whimpered once, then stepped forward. Iris didn't move. She didn't breathe. He walked 5 steps, paused, looked back, and she saw the ache tear him in half. He took 3 more steps, stopped, turned fully toward her, his hands curled, trembling. She didn't call him, didn't say goodbye. She just gave him the smallest nod. It shattered something inside her. He turned back. The mother met him halfway, lifted him, not like something claimed, like something remembered. Then she turned to Iris and bowed, not low, not dramatic, but deep enough that the earth seemed to hush around her. A thank you without words, a farewell without promise. And then, like smoke, they moved into the trees. Iris stood alone, for a long time, until the crickets started again, until the barn light flickered behind her like a memory. She sank to her knees in the dirt. Didn't cry out, didn't collapse. She just lowered her head and wept for a child that had never been hers, but had healed something broken anyway. The stars blinked above her like they knew, and in the far dark, the forest finally exhaled. But the silence didn't feel empty. It felt sacred. The silence after a goodbye like that doesn't settle all at once. It drifts in, slow, like the smell of turned soil after rain, like a song you can still hear long after it stops playing. The morning after Rowan left, Iris woke to the sound of crows gathering on the fence posts, calling to one another like witnesses to something they couldn't explain. The bed beside her still smelled faintly of old hay and wood smoke, the barn air that had clung to her clothes for weeks now, even when she bathed. But there was no weight at her side, no warmth pressed to her ribs, no little hands curled in her coat. And yet, she didn't feel alone. Not quite. She stepped out onto the porch with a mug of coffee that had long gone cold in her hands. The air was still. The kind of still that doesn't feel peaceful. The kind that listens. The kind that waits. She wandered out toward the corn rows, boots brushing the low grass, the sun not fully broken through the haze yet. Her breath hung like smoke. The horses shifted inside the barn, not agitated, just awake. Alert. Watching, maybe. The same thing she felt brushing against her thoughts. The south fence had a break in it. A full post knocked loose. Wire snapped like someone had cut it with something too clean to be wind. Her gut clenched. She moved quickly, leaned to inspect it. The prints were there. Heavy, deep, wide. She didn't panic. Not this time. She pressed her fingers into one of them, then looked up toward the trees. The woods gave nothing back. But the message was clear. They'd come again. Not to take, to protect. She spent the afternoon fixing the fence. Her hands moved with quiet rhythm, looping wire, driving staples, resetting the post. She didn't call for Ray, didn't want him asking questions with eyes that hadn't softened yet. Some things weren't meant to be reasoned with. Some things just were. By the time the sun began its slow fall westward, the field felt different. Lighter, like it had exhaled something. She looked down, where the stalks had bent from last night's storm, or something else. Some of them were standing again. Not broken, just realigned. Like hands had lifted them. Like someone, something, had come through, bent what needed bending, and fixed what it could before fading back into the woods. That night, as the sky darkened to a deep velvet, Iris walked the perimeter again. She stopped short when she reached the woodshed. A pile of firewood sat neatly stacked, not just thrown together, built. Aligned by size, bark facing out, ends trimmed. Her breath caught. She hadn't asked for help, hadn't even thought to. But someone had, and that someone had opposable thumbs. She turned around. The edge of the woods remained still, but the stillness felt like eyes. She left a slice of honeycomb in a shallow dish by the fence line, then went inside without speaking. The next morning it was gone. The dish remained, clean. Ray came in from town 2 days later, the dust of the road still clinging to his boots. He dropped a handful of mail on the table, most of it useless. One envelope caught her eye. Heavy paper, typed name, no return address. She opened it while Ray went to wash up. Inside was a printed flyer, nothing more than black ink on cheap white stock. Land survey, parcel registration, a map of their property, highlighted, and a handwritten note at the bottom in neat, sharp penmanship. We'd like to make an offer. Her stomach turned. Later that day, she found the first sign, tucked into the fence again. A loop of braided grass, tight, purposeful, shaped into the outline of a leaf. Not a perfect replica of her necklace, but close. Too close to be chance. She pressed it to her chest, then placed it on the windowsill, right where the morning sun hit. That evening, after Ray had eaten and disappeared into the garage to fiddle with an old carburetor that never quite worked, Iris stepped into the back field. The air was cool, but not cold. The kind of early fall air that smells like both endings and beginnings. She moved slow, checking the edge rows of the corn. Something had been through here again. This time she saw it clearer. The husks broken low, some of them chewed, but not ruined. More like a traveler had passed through and taken what they needed. Only what they needed. She didn't speak, just left another offering. This time, a whole basket. Apples, bread, salt. An old human tradition. She wasn't sure where she'd learned it. Maybe from Alma. Maybe from somewhere older. That night she slept lightly, dreamed of voices in trees, dreamed of fur brushing her arm like breath. The next morning there was something new on the porch. A single stone, not large, smooth and warm. She didn't know why, but when she touched it, she cried. Days passed. Then the real trouble came. A truck rolled up the drive just after noon. Not Ray's. Not from town. A matte gray pickup. Clean. Too clean. Tires with no mud. A man stepped out. Tan boots, flannel shirt tucked too neat. A leather-bound folder under his arm. Dean Marlowe. She didn't know him, but she knew of him. Land scout. Big money mouth with a polite handshake and eyes like steel-trapped doors. Ray shook his hand. Talked too long, laughed too loud. Iris stayed inside, wiping her hands on a towel that didn't need washing. That evening, after Marlowe left, Ray walked in like he'd swallowed a secret. Iris didn't ask. He poured himself a drink before dinner. 2 fingers of bourbon. He only ever did that when he was lying to himself. At dusk, the barn creaked. She stepped out to check the gate again. The wind had picked up. The corn shifted like restless sleepers. And just before she turned to go back inside, 3 knocks on the side of the barn. Not a bang. Not wind. 3. She froze. The sound didn't repeat, but it didn't need to. She looked toward the fence line. It was too dark to see far, but she felt it. The warning. She stayed up that night. Didn't tell Ray. Didn't sleep. In the early hours, when the first blue of dawn smeared across the edge of the sky, she stepped out with bare feet and a shawl. She carried a basket, set it down where the grass met dirt. Inside, she'd packed fresh eggs, a jar of jam, and one of Ray's old flannel shirts. She didn't know why. It just felt right. She turned slowly, said low and sure to the trees, "Thank you for what you've done, for what you're still doing." No answer came, but she hadn't expected one. As she walked back toward the porch, the light behind her shifted. Not brighter, not darker, just changed, like something larger than her had just turned to leave. She stopped on the step, pressed one hand to the door frame. The wood felt warm. She smiled. Didn't need to see to know it had listened. Inside, Ray stirred. In his sleep, he said a name she didn't know. She stood by the window and watched the horizon bleed gold. The world was changing, but not all change meant ruin. Some change meant the forest had chosen a side, and, for now, it was hers. The rain had dried, but the ground hadn't forgotten. Mud clung to boots. Leaves bent under the weight of memory. There was something in the air that week, something too quiet to be named, too heavy to ignore. Even the wind, usually a companion in these parts, felt like it was holding its breath. Iris knew the forest had shifted. She didn't need a sign to tell her. Her bones had already warned her. It started with the bales of hay near the barn. Moved slightly, just off enough to notice. Then came the prints. Not the wide, familiar kind she had seen before. Not the ones that once followed her like shadows made of mercy. These were sharper, cleaner, human, but unwelcome. The sort of print made by boots that didn't belong to anyone local. And next to one of them, faint in the half-dried soil, a cigarette butt. Menthol. Ray never smoked menthol. That afternoon, he came in with his brow tight and his shoulders slouched like a man dragging something behind him that nobody else could see. She was stirring soup. He didn't speak for a while. "He's back," Ray finally said, voice low. Iris didn't stop stirring. "The man with the truck," Ray nodded slowly. "Dean Marlowe. Said he's not here for the land anymore. Said he's here for something bigger." She didn't ask what. She already knew. Later, Ray sat outside on the porch, looking out across the fields, nursing a beer like it was the only thing keeping him from unraveling. The sun was low, painting long shadows across the crops, but he wasn't looking at the light. He was watching the tree line. Eyes narrowed. Not afraid. Just uncertain. Like he wanted to believe none of this was real. But part of him already did. Iris watched from the window. She saw how tightly he gripped the folder in his lap. Manila. Bent at the edges. When she stepped out and sat beside him, he handed it to her without a word. Inside was a copy of their land survey. Highlighted, marked. A corridor. Drawn straight through their property like it didn't belong to them at all. Written in red ink, migration path? There was more. Photos. Zoomed-in frames of muddy impressions, snapped from a distance, printed in grainy ink. A map with pins, and in the corner, a single plastic bag with a plaster cast inside. Iris held it in both hands. 5 toes, wide ball, too large to fake. Ray looked at her. He's serious. She didn't blink. So am I. That night, Dean came again. Pulled up slow, knocked on the door like he owned the place. Ray answered, but Iris was already standing behind him. Dean took off his cap, eyes sharp, lips curled into a half-smile that didn't touch anything honest. "I'm not here to threaten," he said. "Just want a conversation." Ray didn't move. Iris didn't either. Dean leaned slightly on the porch rail. "I've been tracking these things a long time. Missouri, Arkansas, a few sightings out near the Red River. I know what I'm looking for, and I know what this land is." "It's not yours," Iris said flatly. Dean held her gaze. "It could save lives, change the world." "Or end theirs," she answered. He looked tired then. Not like a man who'd been beaten. Like one who thought he couldn't be wrong. "I need to be remembered for something," he said. "This matters." Ray's jaw tightened. "Then find something that doesn't breathe." Dean didn't reply. Just nodded once, slow. Then walked off the porch and disappeared into the dark like he had never truly belonged to the light anyway. For 3 days, the house stayed on edge. Every window was watched, every door checked twice. Iris kept the lanterns full. She found herself listening for breathing that wasn't there, listening for footsteps too heavy for human weight. And then Jesse came knocking. He'd heard something. "I was out near the ridge, got turned around, ended up back near your old fence. Thought I was alone, but I heard voices. Couldn't see much, but I swear Dean was out there, talking on a satellite phone." Iris frowned. What was he saying? Jesse shifted. Something about traps. Heavy-duty bait and hold. And a date. Soon, Ray stood. "We're running out of time." That evening, Alma called. Her voice was thin on the line, but her words cut clean. "The woods are watching, but they can't always stop what's coming." Iris closed her eyes. Said nothing. Just held the receiver to her ear as Alma whispered something older than fear. "They've always known who to trust, but trust isn't armor. You have to be louder now, in the right way." That night the lantern flickered. Outside, wind bent the tall grass flat. And there, in the dust on the porch, a new print. Fresh. Not from a man. Not from Dean. Something had come close. Not to harm. To warn. Ray found Iris on the porch the next morning, just sitting with the plaster cast still in her lap. He poured coffee and sat beside her. "He won't stop," she said quietly. "I know. What do we do?" Ray didn't speak for a long time. Then finally, his voice broke the still. "We draw a line." They didn't mean violence. They meant resolve. That night, Iris left another offering. Not food this time. Something more sacred. A piece of fabric. Tattered. Faded red. Rowan's old shirt. Folded tight. Wrapped in twine. Placed gently by the fence post. A message. We haven't forgotten. The next morning, the shirt was gone. In its place, a circle of bark. Carved on the inside with a pattern shaped like a flame. One symbol. One promise. The forest had heard them. Dean came again. Not to the door. To the field. Ray found him walking the rows, hand out, touching the stalks like they were currency. Ray didn't yell, didn't push, just stepped between him and the tree line. Dean paused, smiled that same dead smile. "You still think I'm the villain?" Ray looked past him, toward the woods, then back into his eyes. "I think you're the kind of man who'd burn down Eden just to say you saw it first." Dean laughed, short and mean. "History doesn't remember caretakers." "No," Ray said, voice low. "But the forest does." Dean didn't reply. Didn't need to. He just walked away, but not like a man retreating, like one planning. Later that day, Ray found a pile of rocks near the back gate, stacked neatly. Too neatly. Inside, buried under the top stone, metal. A bear trap. Set. Armed. Clean. Jesse buried it deep in the compost pile. No words. Just the look of a man who understood the game had changed. That night the moon rose thin and sharp, and in the distance something howled. Not a wolf, not a man. Something caught in between, waiting, watching. Iris stood at the window long after the others had gone to bed. Her hands rested against the sill, her breath fogging the glass. She didn't cry. She remembered. And remembering was enough to keep her heart steady. The war hadn't started yet, but the sides had been drawn, and in the still between now and what came next, she knew one thing with certainty. The forest had chosen. Now it was time to prove the people had too. The wind had a different weight that night. It didn't howl, didn't snap through the trees the way storms did. It slid low to the ground, pressed itself against doors, whispered beneath floorboards. It carried a kind of warning that didn't need thunder to be heard. Just a feeling in the gut, a prickle across the shoulders. The animals felt it first. Horses pacing. The barn cat gone missing since noon. Even the cicadas quieted earlier than usual, their rhythm broken, like a chorus forgetting the beat. Inside the Coleman house, the air felt stretched. Dinner had been quiet. Ray pushed food around his plate like he was stalling for time. Iris hadn't spoken since he walked in. Her body moved on habit, set the table, ladle the stew, pour the tea. But her mind was somewhere further back, somewhere deeper in the fields, somewhere the fence line didn't keep things out anymore. Ray finally broke the silence, voice rough, like gravel shifting. "We gotta talk." She didn't look up. "Then talk." He waited a second too long, then finally said it. "I know about the boy." The spoon paused mid-air. The clock ticked. Nothing else moved. Her voice didn't crack. "Not a boy." Ray nodded, eyes heavy. "I figured." He leaned forward, both hands clasped now, like praying to a god he didn't believe in. "I saw the shirts missing, heard things out by the barn, and last week there was fur in the trough. Not from the horses." She still didn't look at him. "Iris," he said softly, "I ain't angry." That made her look. "Then what are you?" Ray stared at her with a kind of fear that didn't come from outside threats. It came from inside. The kind that grows when a man's foundation starts to rot. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I don't think you're crazy." She laughed. One sharp breath, no joy. He continued, quieter. "And I think I saw him once. Not the boy, the tall one, years ago. I was a kid, hunting with my dad up near Buffalo Creek. Thought it was a bear, but it wasn't. It looked at me. I ain't never forgot those eyes." Something in Iris's chest loosened. "I didn't tell you," she whispered, "because I knew what it would cost you to believe it." Ray looked away. "We're past that now." They sat for a while, just breathing. Then Iris said what had been pressing against her bones for days. "I think they're in danger." Ray's jaw worked, his fingers lacing tighter. "Because of that man?" "Marlowe's not just looking for land, he's looking for them. I don't know how, but he knows." Ray stood slowly, walked to the window, looked out across the yard, past the fields, toward the tree line. "How far would you go to protect them?" he asked. She answered without pause. "All the way." He nodded. "Then we start tonight." By the time darkness wrapped its full weight around the house, the woods had already begun to shift. Dean Marlowe wasn't alone. Two men moved with him, one tall, long arms, rifle slung lazy across his back. The other short, mean-looking, chewing on a toothpick like it was part of his job. They spoke in low voices, clipped, too casual for what they carried. Marlowe knelt at the edge of the tree line, flashlight turned low. He studied the ground, fingers grazing the leaves. Then he nodded, slow and certain. "They came through here, recent." The shorter man scoffed. "You sure this ain't just some coyote crap?" Marlowe didn't answer. He pulled something from his bag, a plaster cast of a footprint, 12 inches long, wide, 5 clear toe marks. "I made this last year, Arkansas. The prints here match it." The tall man whistled, low and impressed. Marlowe straightened. "Tonight we get proof, then we make history." Not far off, hidden behind the rise near the south fence, Ray crouched beside Jesse. Alma's grandson, now grown, now more muscle than memory. Iris had called him 2 hours earlier, told him everything. He'd only said, "I believe you." Now he scanned the forest ahead with steady eyes. "They're coming in quiet," he muttered. Ray checked the safety on the old shotgun in his lap. "How quiet do we need to be?" "As quiet as they are," Jesse said. "Until they're not." Back at the barn, Iris waited in the loft, lantern off. Window cracked just enough to see the field. She held a whistle carved from ash wood, left for her 2 nights ago near the apple tree. A gift, a signal. If she blew it once, she didn't know what would come, but she knew who it was meant for. In the woods, the men moved deeper, stepping over roots, ducking branches. The short one paused suddenly, raised a hand. "You hear that?" The others froze. A low rustle, then quiet. Then something massive passed between the trees ahead. Not a bear, not deer. It didn't move like prey. It moved like something that didn't need to be afraid. The tall man raised his rifle. "There!" Marlowe stepped forward, eyes blazing. Then everything snapped at once. The forest lit up with motion. Branches cracked. Something ran just out of sight, fast but not away. Circling, stalking. Jesse leapt forward from the brush, grabbing the tall man's gun. "Drop it!" The man spun, surprised, but not enough to fire. Ray emerged from the side, pointing his shotgun directly at Marlowe. "End of the road," he said. But Marlowe only smiled. "You don't know what you're protecting." Ray's voice didn't waver. "I know exactly what I'm protecting, and it ain't you." From the trees behind them came a sound. A deep exhale. Not human. The kind of breath that belonged to something that had survived long winters, long watches, long silence. Marlowe turned slowly and saw Rowan, but not the small shivering child from months ago. Taller now, shoulders broader, still young but no longer helpless. Marlowe stared like he'd found the answer and the question all at once. He raised his rifle. Click! Jammed. A full second of shock. Then Iris's whistle split the night. The woods erupted. The mother came first. She stepped into view like she'd always been there. Marlowe stumbled back, dropped the rifle. She walked toward Rowan, eyes flicking between the men. Jesse stood frozen. Ray lowered his shotgun. Rowan stepped in front of Jesse, his arms wide, defiant. And Iris, from the loft window, felt the tears break loose. Because that was what love looked like. That was what being raised in kindness could do. The short man bolted into the woods. No one followed. Marlowe fell to his knees. He looked up at the mother. She looked down, then reached slowly, picked up a scrap of fabric from his bag. A shirt. Rowan's shirt. She sniffed it, closed her eyes, then opened them again. And in that look, Marlowe saw something no man ever wanted to see in his own reflection. What he had taken, what he had broken, what he had lost. He dropped his head, said nothing. The forest stayed still. No attack, no chase, just silence. And in that silence, Marlowe finally understood. He had come to conquer something that had never belonged to him. And in return, he'd been spared by something stronger than any gun. Mercy. The mother turned, walked back into the trees. Rowan followed her, but only a few steps. Then he looked back, at Iris, at Ray, at Jesse, and for a breath, he stood exactly in the middle of everything, man and myth, love and loss. Then he vanished into the dark. No sound, no goodbye. The night held its breath. Then slowly, gently, it exhaled. Ray stepped forward, lowered his gun, looked at Marlowe, still kneeling in dirt. "You leave this land," he said. "You leave it and never speak of what you saw." Marlowe nodded, because what else could he do? The forest had spoken, and this time it had chosen not to kill, but to forgive. Iris walked out from the barn, slow steps, heart heavy. She stood beside Ray. Didn't say a word. Didn't need to. The sky above them was full of stars, but none of them burned brighter than the memory of what they'd seen that night. A boy who wasn't born here, a mother who had crossed silence to take him back, and the people who had chosen, when it mattered, not to be small, only human. And that, somehow, had been enough. The years didn't ask permission. They just came, one after the next, brushing past like wind through wheat. Sometimes too fast to name, sometimes too slow to escape. The Coleman farm never became anything grand. It didn't get paved or parceled or swallowed up by development the way Marlowe might have dreamed. The land stayed whole. The trees thickened again at the edges, the corn grew steady most years, and the barn, though a little more weathered, still held its bones straight. The world didn't stop spinning, but for the ones who'd lived through that night, the center had shifted. Alma passed in late October, her breath slipping away like it had simply forgotten how to return. Iris sat beside her the whole time, holding her hand, whispering thank yous that didn't need full words. Alma never spoke in those last hours, but her eyes had opened once. And they'd found Iris. And something in them smiled. The funeral was small. No preacher. Just dirt, wind, and the honest kind of grief. Jesse read something he wrote on the back of a grocery list. It didn't rhyme, but it carried weight. At the end, he stepped back, wiped his eyes, and laid a braid of grass over the stones. No one asked where he'd gotten it. The days that followed were quieter, but not empty. Iris still woke early, made coffee while the house was dark, walked the fence line with her hands in her pockets, her boots soft on the dew-wet grass. She didn't leave offerings anymore. Not in the same way. She didn't have to. Some mornings, she'd find a pile of small pebbles arranged in perfect symmetry by the back steps, or a single feather stuck through the wire of the chicken pen. Sometimes just a handprint on the fogged glass of the barn window. Too large for a man. Too gentle for anything else. The forest didn't forget, and neither did she. Jesse came by often now. Fixed the south gate, helped patch the roof after spring storms. He never asked about that night. Not directly, but once, when he was laying down boards for the new porch swing, he said, "There's a kid in me who thought monsters lived in the woods." Guess he wasn't entirely wrong. Iris handed him a glass of lemonade. "Depends on what kind of monsters you mean." He nodded, smiling. "Yeah, I guess so." One morning, a few winters after the leaves stopped changing the way they used to, Iris woke to find a fresh braid of grass hanging from the fence. Tighter than the others. Neater. The kind of work done by practiced fingers, not clumsy hands. Wrapped around the base of it was a loop of string, the kind she'd used to mend a shirt. A red one. Ray's old flannel. She stood there for a long time, her breath rising in slow clouds. She didn't move the braid, didn't touch the string, just whispered, "You're watching." And for the first time in years, the air whispered back. Ray had changed too. Not all at once. Not in ways you could circle with a pen and say, "Here, this was the moment." But he was softer now, quieter. He listened more, smoked less, stopped talking about selling the land. He still didn't like silence, but he didn't fight it anymore. He spent most mornings sitting on the back porch, sipping coffee, watching the tree line with the same expression one might give an old friend walking away. Fondness wrapped in distance. One evening, as the sky settled into gold, Jesse brought over a boy. 17, maybe. Shoulders still caught between youth and manhood. Brown eyes sharp. Hair long and wild, but clean. The boy didn't speak much. Just walked the fields with Jesse, helping him mend a broken gate. Every now and then he'd pause. Look toward the woods. Iris watched from the kitchen window, a hand resting lightly on her heart. She didn't ask who he was. She already knew. That night a fresh wreath appeared on the porch, and beside it, a folded square of red flannel. Iris sat alone by the fireplace, a cup of tea going cold in her hand. She stared into the flame, and the flame stared back. Sometimes memories are louder than thunder, but sometimes they're quiet. A song hummed without melody, a name never spoken. That winter was soft. Snow fell early, thick and heavy, but the farm held strong. Animals stayed healthy. The land seemed to breathe in rhythm with the people now. There was peace here, not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from remembering well. On a morning in February, Jesse knocked on the door. He carried a stack of papers and a voice recorder. Said he was thinking about writing the story down. Not for newspapers, not for the internet. For him, he wanted to remember. Wanted others to know one day. Iris hesitated, then nodded once. They sat at the table where everything had begun and everything had returned. She spoke slowly, not with caution, with care. And at one point, near the end, Jesse asked, "Why'd you keep him, that night in the barn?" Iris stared at her hands, then looked up. "Because he needed me. And now?" She smiled. "Now I need him." Jesse clicked off the recorder. They didn't speak again for a while. Words had done their part. The years kept moving. Ray passed quietly, one spring morning, in his sleep. No struggle. Iris found him with a soft smile still resting on his mouth. She kissed his forehead and whispered, "Thank you for choosing the right side." They buried him near the hill, the one with the Rowan tree. She still walked there some evenings, barefoot in the soft grass, a blanket around her shoulders. Sometimes she'd feel a shift in the air, sometimes a shape just beyond the brush. She never called out, just sat and waited and trusted. One morning, long after Jesse had started his own family, a small knock came at the door. Not urgent, just polite. Outside stood a young man, broad-shouldered, hair pulled back, eyes too knowing for his age. He carried nothing, said nothing. But in his hand he held a single leaf, silver, handmade. Iris stepped back. "Let him in." Made tea. They sat without words, and she knew. This wasn't the end of the story, just its next chapter. Later, Jesse would tell his children about the things their grandmother had whispered into the wind, about the fences that mended themselves, about the woods that had once breathed louder than the sky, and about a creature, not quite man, not quite beast, who had chosen not to destroy, but to learn, and then to love. They would ask if it was real, and Jesse would say the same thing every time. Some truths are too big to fit in a book. Then he'd smile, and too precious to give to those who wouldn't understand. So he kept it between them, a secret held with reverence, like a promise, or a prayer. Now, on the edge of the farm, the trees stand taller, the birds sing louder, the air feels warmer, and some mornings, before the sun lifts fully into the sky, if you're standing in the right place, and the wind leans just so, you might hear it. A sound not meant for fear, not meant for fame, just a reminder. That kindness, once given, never really leaves. It just changes shape and waits. Iris still rises early, still walks the path to the hill, still leaves one basket by the fence when the season turns. Not because she must, but because she remembers. And memory is a kind of love too. The barn still stands, the porch still creaks, the land still grows. And some nights, when the stars burn especially clear and the moonlight dances across the corn, a shadow might move through the rows. Too tall, too quiet, too careful to be human, but gentle, always gentle. And the old woman on the porch will sip her tea and smile without turning, because she knows. The forest remembers, and she was never alone. Sometimes what saves us doesn't look the way we expect. It doesn't arrive with answers. It doesn't knock on the front door wearing a name we recognize. Sometimes it shows up quiet, half-hidden, carrying its own wounds, asking nothing but a place to rest. And if we're lucky, if we're kind, we let it in. Not because we have to, but because something in us remembers what it felt like to be lost too. This story isn't really about monsters in the woods. It's about the parts of us that live in shadow, untamed, misunderstood, waiting to be seen. It's about the simple courage it takes to meet something unknown with an open hand instead of a closed fist, to choose protection over profit, to build instead of break, to listen instead of conquer. And isn't that what humanity keeps forgetting? That the strongest force in this world has never been power, but mercy. That the land we walk remembers how we treat it. That the small choices, tending a wound, offering food, staying silent when it's easier to speak, can echo louder than any name carved in stone. Some stories never make the news. They're not loud enough, not clean enough, not marketable. But they're true. And sometimes the truth needs a quieter room to bloom. The kind of truth that doesn't need to be proven, just held. like breath, like a child's hand, like a promise made in the dark and kept long after the storm has passed. We don't always know the impact of our kindness. We don't always get to see the end of the road. But that doesn't make the road meaningless. It means we trust that something good will grow from the seeds we bury, even if we never see the harvest. Because kindness, in the end, is never wasted. It's stitched into the fabric of this world, and when the time comes, it finds its way back. Maybe not in the form we expect, maybe not in this lifetime, but it comes, in the wind, in the trees, in the eyes of a stranger who understands you before a word is spoken. So wherever you are tonight, whether you're in a quiet house or a crowded city, whether you're carrying loss or love or both, know this: the forest remembers, and what you give to the world in tenderness will outlive you in ways you may never understand. Thank you for walking this story with us. If it touched something inside you, we'd love to hear it. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, or simply sit with it a while. And if you'd like to be part of more stories like this, stories with heart, with mystery, with something to say beneath the silence, don't forget to follow, subscribe, and join us on the next path through the trees. Until then, stay kind. The world is always listening.